Okay, it's going. So this is our novel presentation. The novel and your experience reading it.
So I read Extremely Close and Incredibly Loud. I think that's the right title. But the book was about a kid named Oscar whose dad dies. Oscar is then depressed, and he eventually recovers and manages to, be normal again in the book. So the book starts off by showing how close Oscar is with his family. The title is Extremely Close. That's probably for, him and his father being extremely close. His dad then dies in 9/11, the tower. He was in one of the towers, I think. He might have just been around. The rest of the book is Oscar following what he thought was a trail of clues left by his dad. Eventually, he finds that it wasn't from his dad, but then he realizes sort of that it doesn't matter. He still cares about it, but he has to. He can't let it affect him. He then digs up his dad's empty grave with a person who is his grandpa, but he doesn't know that it's his grandpa. So so they bury letters that the grandpa had for his dad. So for reading strategy, I didn't really particularly read it in any special way. I just read through the book. One of the quotes from the book is "I'm sorry, it's okay that you're looking for something." Okay. So this is where he finally found out, it's the end of the trail of clues, and he found out that it wasn't from his dad. It was just something his dad bought and had something in it. So the person who was also looking for it said, "I'm so sorry. I know that you're looking for something too, and I know that this isn't what you're looking for." He responded by saying, "It's okay." This was on page 300. So this is where he found that what he thought his dad left for him to find didn't have anything to do with his dad. In the book, it says that he was okay, but then he went on and sort of decided that he was done with that. He had to move on with his life, basically. So it just shows that he was able to get over and just keep going from what happened. So a common theme in this book is that fathers and sons...
Oh, I thought we were gonna, you tell your summary and I tell my summary.
Yeah, but then I kept reading it and I got confused.
Okay, that's okay. Can I just go?
Yeah.
Alright. So I read The Road by Cormac McCarthy. It's about a father and his son in a post-apocalyptic time, and they're trying to survive with nothing but a pistol to protect themselves from cannibalistic thieves, or bad guys as they call them, who also survived. And they scan the road for their next meal. So the father and son's destination is the coast, because they want to go there just because they don't even know if it's even worth it. They just want to see if there is anything for them there. So they travel along this road. It goes straight there, to the coast. On their journey, they come across struggles to find their necessities, and they try to avoid the bad guys the best they can, and the father will do whatever it takes to make sure they don't find him and his son. The father's whole motivation is surviving to protect his son. The son is very curious and asks the father a lot of questions, and the father tries to be completely honest with him in any situation they go through. And he tells him stories about what it was like before the apocalypse, while trying to help keep the boy's innocence. So my quote is, "People sitting on the sidewalk in the dawn half immolate, smoking in their clothes, like failed sectarian suicides. Others would come to help them. Within a year there were fires on the ridges and deranged chanting the screams of the murdered. By the day the dead impaled on spikes along the road. What have they done?" He thought that in the history of the world it it might even be that there was more punishment than crime, but he took small comfort from it. Yeah, that like explains like what the father and son like are trying to avoid, and like what the apocalypse is like for everyone. So my reading strategy, when I read it, I attempted to focus all my attention on what was going on, though I couldn't do that all the time. Like I would completely blank and then I'd have to read it over.
Do you have a quote?
But like, yeah, I said the quote.
Okay, I just got confused.
Like, I really enjoyed this book. I was immediately interested when I read the back of it. It was an easy read, and I would definitely check out some of the author's other works because I enjoy his style of writing. And then our common theme.
Yeah, our common theme was that fathers and sons depend on each other, especially when they don't have anybody else to depend on. So a quote from my book is like, it was when his dad was just sort of teaching him one morning, and it was, Oscar said, but if you don't tell me anything, how can I ever be right? And his father said, another way of looking at it would be, how could you ever be wrong? And that was just like, good father-son moment. That was on page 9. The quote shows the relationship between Oscar and his dad. His dad was teaching him while reading the newspaper. The quote shows like a strong connection between them. Oscar didn't really have any friends his age, and he tended to be with like just his older family members, like his dad, his mom, or his grandma. Especially his dad though. Since he had a couple of other people to rely on, he only had a few of them. He depended heavily on them and his dad for emotional support and life lessons.
So being that the story's focus is on the father and son's life in the story, like they like heavily rely on each other because they're the only people that they have. That's why the theme fits well with my book as well. And my quote is, they squatted in the road and ate cold rice and cold beans that they'd cooked days ago, already beginning to ferment. No place to make a fire that would not be seen. They slept huddled together in the rank quilts in the dark and the cold. He held the boy close to him, so thin. My heart, he said, my heart. But he knew that if he were a good father, still it might well be said. White Mel?
That's fine.
Father, that the boy was all that stood between him and death. And that was page 44 of the book.
So, for classic definition, I think that a well-written book that a lot of scholarly people liked is pretty much what a classic book is. Because, like, if somebody likes it and they want it to be, like, they think it's a classic, then that's what it is. So I think my book is a classic. It's written very well, and in a way that, like, people who would be considered, like, authorities of literature and reading would probably like. One quote is, I'm going to need a laminator. A laminator? There's something incredibly wonderful that I want to preserve. That was on page 12. It's a very well-written, like, the quote was written very well in a way that makes sense for, like, Oscar, the person. Like, Oscar is the main sort of voice throughout the story, and it's written in such, like, just exactly how he would be. The way Oscar is, like, who he is as a person is also probably similar to people who would, like, want to rate or grade books. And, he was just very interesting in everything and tried to be, like, very sort of fluid of word. I think that people who appreciate how a book is written would really enjoy the book. That, to me, makes it a classic.
This book is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and used by our definition, it would be a classic. It is obviously highly liked by many readers. Although it is an easy read, the text is very descriptive. It provides imagery and shows a moving relationship amongst a father and his son, and the survival aspect of it is what makes it interesting. My quote is, "When it was light enough to use the binoculars, he glassed the valley below, everything falling away into the murk, the soft ash blowing in loose swirls over the black top. He studied what he could see. The segments of the road down there among dead trees, looking for anything of color, any movement, any trace of standing smoke. He lowered the glasses and pulled down the cotton mask from his face and wiped his nose on the back of his wrist, and then glazed, is that glass or glazed? Glassed.
Yeah, probably.
Country again. Then he just sat there holding the binoculars and watching the ashen daylight congeal over the land. He spoke that the child was his warrant. He said, if he is not the word of God, God never spoke. Like, you see, like, the imagery and, like, how he's, like, describing the land and stuff. It's very, like, pleasing, I guess. And, like, the man's whole purpose was protecting the boy. He's doing something good. He is his warrant. And then our literary
analysis. So for mine, I try to answer the question: how does the reader's own psychology affect their response to the work? So I think that what you have experienced and how close you are to your family greatly changes your view of the book. I personally haven't dealt with great loss. I can't even imagine losing my dad. So it's hard to relate with what Oscar is going through in the novel. I'm also not as reliant on my dad as Oscar was in the novel, so it's even harder to relate to him. One part of the book I found really hard to relate to was so he was at a mental doctor, and the doctor was asking him questions. So Oscar said, "What emotions are you?" No, not Oscar. The doctor said, "What emotions are you feeling?" All of them. Like, right now I'm feeling sadness, happiness, anger, love, guilt, joy, shame, and it kept going. So that was on page 201. I never really felt like that, at least not that I remember. I couldn't connect with Oscar. I think that a person that, either felt that before or lost someone would get a lot more out of the book than I did. I couldn't really connect to it very well.
So, for my question, it says, what does the work say about the nature of good and evil? And the quote I used to prove this is, he came forward holding his belt by one hand, the holes in it marked